The wind was a blade. It cut through Clara Reyes's wool coat like it was nothing but paper, each gust sharper than the last. Snow whipped across the open stretch of land, turning the world into a pale, howling blur. Her boots sank ankle-deep with every step filling with ice and misery. The cabin she'd called home only yesterday had long disappeared behind a wall of white. She didn't look back. Looking back meant weakness. Her fingers were already stiff, her lips raw and cracked from the wind. She'd tried to keep her scarf tight around her mouth, but the gusts tore at it, pulling like greedy hands. Clara pressed it closer, breathing shallowly to keep the burning air from freezing her lungs. Every breath tasted of blood and snow. She was 30 miles from the nearest town or so her late husband had said once, back when she thought marriage meant safety. Now, with the Reyes family's curses still ringing in her ears, that distance felt more like a death sentence than a number. "You're barren," her sister-in-law had hissed, as the men threw her bag onto the frozen ground. "Useless. A mouth that gives nothing back. And the worst, you were never family." They didn't hit her. They didn't have to. Words cut deeper when the world was already cold. The trail she followed was half-buried, snaking between skeletal trees and broken fences swallowed by snow. No birds. No voices. Just the groan of the wind and the distant snap of a dying branch. Night was closing in, slow and merciless. She stumbled on a route she didn't see. Pain shot up her leg, sharp and hot, as she fell forward into the drift. For a long, breathless moment, Clara didn't move. The snow cradled her like a grave with soft, silent waiting. It would be so easy to stop, to let the cold swallow her. Her eyes fluttered shut. She saw her mother's face, soft and warm like sunlight, long before marriage and Wyoming stripped everything away. She saw herself at 17, laughing with her sister in San Antonio, spinning barefoot on a summer porch. That girl felt like someone else entirely. A horse whinnied. Her eyes snapped open. Through the curtain of snow, a shadow moved, a dark figure on horseback, tall and broad-shouldered. The horse's hooves crunched over the frozen ground, slow and deliberate. Clara pushed herself up on shaking elbows, her heart hammering between terror and hope. The figure didn't call out. He just approached. A man dismounted, boots, heavy long coat trailing snow behind him. His hat was low brim, hiding most of his face except the beard, thick and ice-streaked. He moved like someone used to this land. Not kind, not cruel, just inevitable. "You're a long way from anywhere," he said, voice low and graveled. Clara tried to speak, but her throat felt raw, as if the cold had carved it hollow. She coughed, the sound brittle. "I was left." He looked her over, not with pity, with calculation, the way a man looks at a broken fence he might fix or burn down. His eyes were a cold gray, steady as the mountains behind him. "Left," he repeated. "That'll kill you out here." A gust slammed into them, and she wrapped her arms tighter around herself. He didn't flinch. He didn't offer a hand either. But after a long, measuring silence, he reached down, grabbed her bag, and threw it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Then he offered his hand, not gently but firm, like an order more than a kindness. "Come on." She hesitated. Every part of her screamed to trust no man ever again. But the cold was worse than pride, worse than fear. She let him pull her up. He hoisted her onto the horse in front of him, his coat brushing against her back as he climbed behind. She could feel the heat of him, a human furnace against the winter, and for the first time in hours, she could breathe without pain. His arm came around her to hold the reins, not tender, but steady. "What's your name?" he asked as the horse turned. "Clara." Clara, what Reyes? He gave a short grunt. I'm Samson. They didn't speak again. The horse moved through the snow with a steady rhythm like it had made this trip 100 times. The trees thickened, the wind softened, and a shape emerged through the storm, a cabin dark wood and smoke trailing from its chimney like a promise. It looked rough but sturdy, a lone spine against the endless white. When he opened the door, the warmth hit her like a fist. A wood stove roared in the corner, throwing light against walls lined with tools, animal pelts, and shelves of canned goods. The scent of firewood smoke and old pine filled the room. It wasn't home, but it was alive. Sit, he said, pointing at a chair near the stove. Clara didn't argue. She sat stretching her numb hands toward the heat. Pins and needles bit at her fingers as the blood returned, and she bit down hard to keep from crying out. Samson hung his coat, unbuckled his gun belt, and moved with the quiet ease of someone who had no one to talk to for years. You from town? He asked. No. West of here. Family. She gave a bitter laugh. Not anymore. He didn't press. Just nodded once as if that was all he needed to know. Then he poured a cup of something steaming coffee, strong and black, and slid it across the table. She wrapped both hands around it, feeling the heat soak in like mercy. The storm outside howled against the walls, but the cabin stood firm. Clara sipped, watching him from the corner of her eye. There was no ring on his hand. No sign of another person, no woman's shawl, no child's toy. Just one bed against the far wall, a rifle hanging above it, 2 boots by the door. Everything in this place had its place, including her, if she wasn't careful. You live here alone? She asked. Mostly. Mostly. He glanced toward a closed door on the far end of the cabin. There's a boy. He don't talk much. A boy. For a heartbeat, something inside her, a piece long starved, twitched. She hadn't seen a child in months. But before she could ask more, Samson walked closer, his boots heavy on the wood. He leaned against the table close enough that the heat from the stove caught the hard angles of his face. His eyes didn't wander like other men's. They just looked as if measuring her against something he hadn't said yet. You want to live, Clara Reyes? He asked quietly. Her throat tightened. She didn't answer. 'Cause out here nobody gets anything for free. He paused, voice dropping lower like a lock clicking into place. You want a roof over your head. Then you were gonna have to give me a reason to keep you. Her fingers went numb around the cup, though it was burning hot. She stared at him, at the shadows, his face cast against the wall, at the gun, hanging silently above his bed. For a moment she felt the cold of the snow again, even inside this burning room. He didn't smile. He didn't threaten. But his words weighed heavier than the blizzard. You want to live, he said. Then you're gonna have to give me a reason to keep you. And just like that, the storm outside didn't feel like the most dangerous thing anymore. Clara didn't sleep that night. She lay curled on the narrow cot Samson had pointed her toward, wrapped in a heavy wool blanket that smelled of smoke and pine. The stove still glowed, its heat pressing against the cabin walls like a heartbeat, but it didn't reach the cold, clawing inside her chest. Every creak of the timber, every groan of the wind, made her fingers tighten around the edge of the blanket. What did he mean, give me a reason to keep you? She already knew. Men like Samson didn't deal in favors, and no one out here saved a stranger just to be kind. The cabin was quiet, save for the ticking of something metal near the fire, a kettle cooling. She could hear him moving beyond the partition boots, scuffing wood, then silence. No second bed, no second voice. Just him. And the boy. Elijah. The door hadn't opened since she arrived. but she could feel someone watching from behind it. By morning, the wind had eased and the world outside glowed blue and white. Frost webbed across the cabin windows like spider silk. Clara dressed in the same clothes she'd worn through the storm, now stiff with dried sweat and melted snow, and stepped out into the main room. Samson stood at the stove pouring coffee. His coat hung on the hook beside the door, his rifle freshly cleaned on the table. He didn't look up. "There's bread," he said, nodding at a plate beside the fire. "Not much else till spring." Clara took it wordlessly, sitting in the chair furthest from him. Her hands trembled slightly, but she hid it by tearing the bread into small, silent pieces. He finally looked up. His eyes were clear this morning, steel blue and unreadable. "I don't talk circles," he said, "and I don't take people in for charity." She swallowed hard. "I didn't ask you to." "No," he said, "but you didn't say no either." Clara stared at the fire. "You said I had to give you a reason." "I did." "And what kind of reason were you expecting?" Samson set down his mug, then leaned both hands on the table. His tone didn't rise, but it thickened with something colder than anger. "A man like me living out here alone can't afford passengers. Not in winter. I need someone who can work, who can carry their weight, and more." She kept her eyes down, breath slowing. "What kind of work?" she asked, already knowing. He didn't flinch. "I want a child," he said. "A son, if I'm lucky. Blood of my blood. Someone to carry my name and this land when I'm gone." The words landed hard like a slap that didn't leave a mark. Clara stared at him, her chest tightening. "You want a wife?" "No," he said simply. "I want a mother for my heir. There's a difference." The fire snapped behind them. Clara's stomach twisted. She stood slowly. "So that's the price." His face didn't change. "Yes." She took a shaky breath and stepped back, her mind racing. "And if I say no, then you leave. Same way you came. I won't stop you." Clara laughed, short and bitter. "You think I'll make it 10 miles in this snow?" He didn't answer. For a long moment, neither spoke. The cabin felt smaller than it had last night, the air thicker. Clara looked at the door, then at her hands. "And if I say yes, then you stay. You eat, you sleep warm. Come spring, we plant, build, raise the boy Elijah. He's not mine by blood. He don't talk much, but he's sharp, watches everything. He'll need a mother too." Clara's throat tightened. "Does he know what you're asking?" Samson's jaw flexed. "He knows enough." A silence settled between them like ash. Clara turned toward the window, watching snow drift from the roof like falling feathers. Her thoughts spun. What kind of life was this? But what other life was left? She had nothing. No family. No money. No way back. And yet her soul recoiled. She had buried too many pieces of herself in the last year. Was she about to trade the last one just to stay warm, you said? "I have a choice," she said finally. Samson nodded once. 3 days. Then you decide. Her eyes snapped back to him. 3 days. You need rest, food, time to think. And if I try to run, he didn't smile, didn't threaten, just answered like it was fact. You won't get far, but I won't chase you. Clara didn't respond. She turned and walked to the door, needing air, needing distance. She opened it and nearly collided with a small figure standing there, still as a deer. Elijah. He looked about 10. Dark hair, tattered coat too big for his frame boots, scuffed nearly to the sole. His cheeks were pink from the cold, but his eyes were old, too old. He stared up at her without blinking. Then slowly he held out a tin cup with both hands. "Milk," he said. One word, quiet and hoarse. Then he turned and walked away. Clara watched him disappear behind the shed, a small shadow against the white. Back inside, Samson had sat down again, sipping his coffee like nothing had changed. But everything had. Clara stood in the doorway holding the tin cup, her breath curling in the cold. 3 days. 3 days to decide if she would give up what was left of her freedom. For a child, a roof, and a name that wasn't hers. She looked down at the milk still warm. Maybe it was already too late. 3 days, Samson had said. Then you give me a yes, or you walk back out into the snow. Elijah was already outside when Clara stepped into the morning light. He moved like a shadow, silent, quick, and light-footed, shoveling snow away from the chicken coop with a short-handled spade. The sun barely broke through the clouds, and everything looked like it had been dipped in silver. Clara's breath came in clouds, but the boy didn't seem to notice the cold. She watched him for a moment from the porch. His coat still hung off his narrow frame sleeves, dragging past his wrists. But his movements were precise, careful, like someone twice his age. He didn't glance her way once. "Need help?" she asked finally. He paused, stood up straight, then shook his head without turning around. Clara stepped down anyway, her boots crunching over the frozen ground. "I don't mind. My hands are warmer than yesterday." Still nothing. She picked up the second shovel leaning against the wall. It was dull, the handle worn from years of use. She cleared a patch of snow near the fence in silence, her breath steady. A few minutes passed before she glanced over again. Elijah was watching her now. Not openly, not directly, but from the corner of his eye, measuring, judging, like a stray dog deciding whether to trust a hand or bite it. "You don't talk much, huh?" she said, keeping her voice light. He looked down and kept working. Clara sighed, not out of frustration, but something else. Sadness, maybe. Or guilt. "I used to be quiet, too. Back when my mom passed, people talked around me like I wasn't even there." Elijah didn't respond, but his hands slowed, just slightly. She shoveled a little more, then leaned on the handle. "You ever miss anyone, Silence?" "Then my sister." The words were so soft, Clara almost missed them. She turned to him, careful not to move too quickly. "What was her name, Lila?" Clara swallowed. "Was she older than you?" He shook his head. "Younger. By 2 years." What happened to her? Elijah didn't answer. His jaw tightened. He dropped the shovel and walked toward the barn. Clara watched him go, heart tightening. She didn't follow. Not yet. Inside the barn, she found him an hour later feeding the goats. He didn't speak again, but he didn't walk away either. They worked in silence, milking, cleaning, sweeping hay. It was the kind of quiet that said, "If you don't push me, I might let you stay." By noon, Clara's hands ached and her shoulders burned. But it felt good, real, like she was building something instead of falling apart. Back in the cabin, she found Samson skinning a rabbit on the back porch. His knife was clean, precise, and his face blank. He didn't look up when she stepped outside. "He spoke to me," she said. Samson nodded, still working. "Boy's got more scars inside than he shows outside." Clara leaned against the post. "You found him out here 3 winters ago." Half-starved. Had a sister with him then. He paused. She didn't make it. Clara felt her throat tighten. What happened, Frostbite? No medicine. Too far from town. I buried her behind the barn. They stood in silence for a while. Samson's knife slid through flesh with a wet sound. He trusts you, Clara said. No, Samson replied. He needs me. Not the same thing. Clara looked out at the tree line at the snow beginning to fall again. Why didn't you take him into town? Find him a real home, Samson looked up finally. Same reason I didn't leave him in the snow. I'm not a good man, but I ain't heartless. She studied him. His face was hard, weather-beaten, and closed, but not cruel. Not entirely. She saw something else there now, regret maybe, or exhaustion. Do you care about him? She asked. I feed him. I keep him alive. That's not the same as caring. He met her eyes and for once didn't look away. You think I'm looking for love, Clara? Out here she didn't answer. He stood, wiped his hands on a rag, and walked past her toward the door. 3 days, he reminded her. I won't ask again. That night, Clara sat beside the stove peeling potatoes. Elijah was at the table sketching something with charcoal on a scrap of brown paper. She peeked over occasionally, catching glimpses of trees, mountains, and what looked like a small girl in a bonnet. Is that Lila? She asked softly. He nodded without looking up. She looks happy. She was. Clara smiled despite the heaviness in her chest. I think she'd be proud you remember her this way. Elijah stopped drawing. His hand hovered over the paper. Samson wants you to stay, he said finally. Clara's breath caught. Did he tell you that? He didn't have to. She leaned forward, voice careful. And what do you want? The boy stared at her long and unblinking. There was something in his eyes now, a flicker of something deeper. Hope, maybe. Or fear dressed as hope. Don't say yes, Elijah whispered. He's not what he seems. Clara froze. Elijah. But he stood up and walked toward his room, leaving the drawing behind. Clara picked it up. The girl in the sketch smiled, surrounded by trees. But in the distance, just barely visible, was the outline of a cabin, and a man standing in the doorway, dark, faceless, watching. She stared at it for a long time. Don't say yes, Elijah whispered. He's not what he seems. The snow had let up by morning, leaving the sky pale and still. Clara wrapped herself in her coat and scarf, slipping out of the cabin without a word. Elijah's warning echoed in her chest like a heartbeat. He's not what he seems. She needed answers, not just about Samson, but about why a child would draw his sister smiling, with a faceless man standing in the shadows behind her. Why his voice trembled when he spoke of trust, and why a part of her, no matter how many times she tried to bury it, had started to believe Elijah might be right. Samson had told her there was a neighbor nearby, a mile, maybe 2, but didn't say much else. She'd seen the chimney smoke once thin and curling between the trees. Today she followed it. The path through the woods was rough, the snow shallow enough now to show packed dirt in places. Ravens flitted between the branches, watching with eyes too human. The forest here felt older than time, untouched. Halfway up the ridge, Clara saw the house, a lopsided shack with a slanted roof, one broken window, patched with fabric. A clothesline stretched between 2 trees, frozen shirts hanging stiff like ghosts. Smoke drifted lazily from the chimney. She hesitated, then stepped forward and knocked. Nothing. She knocked again, harder. Hello? From inside, something shuffled. Then a woman's voice, sharp and dry, doors not locked. It never is. Clara pushed it open. The interior was dim and warm, lit only by a single lantern and the stove's glow. Shelves lined the walls cluttered with jars of herbs, folded bandages, books with cracked leather spines. And in the center, sitting in a rocking chair beside the fire, was a woman wrapped in a quilt. Her face was lined like tree bark, her eyes sharp beneath a mess of white hair. "You're the one he brought in from the snow," the woman said. Clara blinked. "You know Samson. Know him, yes. Know of him better." She motioned to a stool. "Sit. Cold like that seeps into your bones if you let it." Clara sat cautious. "I'm Clara. Halloran," the woman said. "Used to be nurse for the Union Army. Been here ever since." Her eyes scanned Clara. "You look tired. Not just in your face. In your spine." Clara gave a tight smile. "It's been a long week." Mrs. Halloran grunted. "It's always a long week with that man." Clara leaned in slightly. "Can I ask you something? You came all the way up here." "Might as well. Elijah told me Samson isn't what he seems, that I shouldn't trust him." Mrs. Halloran didn't flinch. She reached for a mug beside her, sipped something that smelled like mint and whiskey. Then she looked Clara dead in the eye. "Samson McAllister was born on this land, raised by a man who believed sons were worth more than salvation." She paused. "Samson fought in the war, came back with a limp and a stare that never left the ground. Then he met a woman in Cheyenne. Pretty thing, sweet voice. Couldn't carry a child to term if her life depended on it." Clara swallowed. She was his wife, almost. They tried twice, lost both. Her voice turned distant. "He built her a cradle after the first. After the second, he tore it apart with his bare hands." Clara closed her eyes. "She left him." Mrs. Halloran nodded. "Didn't say goodbye. Just vanished one morning. Took his last softness with her." For a while neither spoke. The fire cracked between them. "He told me he wants an heir," Clara said finally. "Not a wife, a child. That sounds about right. He says he won't force me, that I have a choice." Mrs. Halloran looked at her for a long, hard second. "Men like Samson don't need to force you. They let the world do it for them. Starvation, snow, silence. They make you choose the only door that isn't locked, then pretend they gave you a key." Clara's hands curled in her lap. "He's not cruel." No, Halloran agreed. "But he's dangerous in quieter ways. The kind that make you forget your name until you're someone else entirely." Clara felt something break loose in her chest. A truth she hadn't let herself say aloud. "I'm not ready to lose what's left of me. Elijah," she whispered. "He's afraid." Mrs. Halloran's eyes softened. "That boy's been afraid since the day I found him curled around his sister's frozen body. Samson brought him back here like a stray dog, fed him, sheltered him, but never learned how to be soft." Clara's throat burned. "And you? Why do you stay? I don't stay. I survive. Same as you." She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "But if you're smart, you'll leave before winter turns you into something you don't recognize." Clara stood slowly. "I can't yet. I have 3 days." Mrs. Halloran smiled bitter and slow. "He gave you 3 days. Well, he's gotten polite." Clara reached the door hand, trembling on the knob. Clara Halloran said behind her. She turned, He won't hurt you, but he might use you until there's nothing left. The words landed like stones in her stomach. Back in the woods, the wind had picked up again. The trees creaked above her like old bones. Clara walked faster than before, heart pounding. Not just from fear, but from clarity. Back at the cabin, Elijah was stacking kindling near the porch. He looked up when he saw her eyes searching her face. Clara didn't speak, just nodded once. Inside, Samson sat sharpening a blade, quiet and methodical. She hung up her coat, crossed the room, and sat across from him. "You find what you were looking for?" he asked. "Not yet," she said, "but I'm getting closer." "He won't hurt you," Mrs. Halloran had said, "but he might use you until there's nothing left." The map was hand-drawn, old and smudged at the corners. Mrs. Halloran had folded it into Clara's coat pocket the morning after their talk without a word. Just a nod. A glance that said, "If you're going to run, do it while you still remember how." Clara waited until Samson left for the ridge to check his traps before pulling it out. She studied it by the light of the stove while Elijah sat at the table, carving something from a chunk of wood. He didn't look up, but she knew he noticed. He always did. The trail marked in pencil wove through dense forest, then veered west toward a frozen creek. From there, it wound down past what was once a mining road, abandoned now, and ended at a note scribbled in block letters, 2 days to town. 4 if weather turns. She folded the map quickly as Elijah stood and walked past her toward the back door. "Elijah," she called softly. He stopped. "If I asked you to come with me, would you?" He turned, lips parting as if to answer, but then he shook his head just once and slipped outside. Clara watched the door swing closed. Her fingers tightened around the map. 2 days, maybe 4. On foot. Through snow alone, with nothing but hope and desperation to carry her. But what else was new that night? She packed slowly, careful not to make noise. 1 can of beans, half a loaf of bread, a worn pair of gloves. The map. She wrapped them in a bundle and tucked it beneath her cot. Her hands didn't tremble. That scared her more than anything. She told herself she would wait until morning. Then Elijah collapsed. It happened just after midnight. She heard the sound, soft, a dull thump on the wooden floor, and sat bolt upright. The door to his room was cracked open. Samson was already kneeling beside the boy by the time Clara reached him. "Elijah," she dropped to her knees. "What happened?" "He was up. Said he felt cold." Then dropped, Samson muttered, lifting the boy gently. "He's burning up. Fever's through the roof." Clara pressed a hand to Elijah's forehead. He was soaked in sweat, his face pale and flushed. His eyes fluttered but didn't open. Samson laid him on the cot near the stove. "We need water. Cold rags." Clara moved fast. Snow melted in a pan. Rags soaked and pressed to his head, his chest. The fire blazed hotter. The boy whimpered in half-sleep, curling toward her touch, like a child much younger. By dawn, his fever had climbed. Clara sat at his side, wiping his brow every few minutes, whispering nonsense just to fill the room with sound. Samson moved stiffly around the cabin, pacing, stoking the fire, muttering about herbs and how far Mrs. Halloran was. "He needs medicine," Clara said. "Real medicine. Not rabbit stew and hope." Samson didn't answer. "He's going to die, isn't he?" "He's strong," Samson said, but his voice cracked on the word. Clara looked at him, really looked. For the first time, she saw the fear under his jaw, the helplessness under his fists. Not the kind of fear men admit, but the kind they wear in silence. You care about him, she said. Samson stared at the floor. He's all I got. Those 4 words unraveled something in her. Clara turned back to Elijah, whose breathing had grown shallow. She felt the heat of him through the blanket. The map in her pocket felt like it weighed 10 pounds. She could go, she still had time. If she left now, she'd be past the ridge by sunset. Or she could stay. Sit by this boy's bed, wipe his sweat, whisper to him. Pray, though she hadn't done that in years. Her breath caught. This wasn't about survival anymore. Not hers. It was about him. Clara leaned down and kissed Elijah's forehead. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. The next hours were slow and silent. Samson barely spoke. He kept checking the window like expecting someone to ride in with a miracle. Clara never left Elijah's side. By nightfall, the fever finally broke. Clara woke with her head resting beside the boy's shoulder and felt him stir. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and weak, but focused. You stayed, he whispered. She smiled through the tightness in her chest. Of course I did. He blinked once. I'm glad. Later, after he'd fallen back into sleep, she stepped out onto the porch. The forest was still. The stars looked like pinpricks in a black sheet. Clara held the map in her hand one last time, then slowly tore it in half. Then again, and again, until the pieces blew across the snow like ash. Behind her, Samson spoke from the doorway. You had it all planned. Clara didn't turn around. I did. Why'd you stay? She paused. Because no one else would. He didn't say anything for a long time, just stood there watching her. Then he said, You'll need new clothes. Come spring, we'll start planting. She nodded, but inside she knew it wasn't over. Staying had bought time, not peace. And somewhere beneath all the warmth and flickers of trust, the trade still loomed like a shadow. She held the map in one hand, and Elijah's burning forehead in the other. Only one could be saved by morning. The snow melted slowly that week. Each day the ground softened, the sky shifted, and the forest exhaled. Clara could hear it, the sound of dripping eaves, the river beginning to whisper beneath the ice-birds, returning one call at a time. Winter, it seemed, was loosening its grip. Elijah was still pale but recovering. He moved slower than before, spent most days sleeping, or curled by the stove, but his eyes had cleared, and when he smiled soft crooked, it settled something deep inside Clara that had been restless since the moment she arrived. The morning after the fever broke, she found Samson on the side of the cabin, hammering planks over the shed roof. His sleeves were rolled, arms taut, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. He looked up when she stepped into the light, squinting against the sun. I can help, she offered. He nodded once and handed her a nail pouch. They worked in silence, comfortable now. The kind that grows between people who've sat through long nights and shared hard truths without saying them out loud. She held the boards steady while he hammered. He steadied the ladder while she climbed. When she laughed, genuine and sudden, after hitting her thumb, he looked surprised, and then smiled just a little. You've changed, she said, wiping sawdust from her hands. I haven't, he replied. You're just seeing more of me. That night after Elijah had gone to bed, Clara stood outside under the stars, arms wrapped around herself. The wind was softer now, brushing the trees instead of slicing through them. Samson joined her without a word, stepping out with 2 tin mugs of something strong and sweet. She took one. Why me? She asked, not looking at him. He didn't pretend not to understand. Because you didn't beg, he said after a long pause. Didn't break. You looked me dead in the eye even when you were dying. Clara took a sip. The drink burned, but it warmed her from the inside. You think strength means someone's worth keeping? I think it means they know how to stay. She turned to face him. Is that what you're looking for? Someone to stay. He hesitated. Then I thought I was looking for a child. But maybe I was just looking for someone who wouldn't leave. The words sat heavy between them, suspended in the cold air. I'm not your wife, she said gently. I know. And I didn't say yes. I know that too. But I'm still here. His eyes met hers. And in that look, there was something rawer than desire, something hungrier than need, a longing he didn't know how to name. Not love. Not yet. But not survival either. Clara reached up, brushing a piece of sawdust from his shoulder. Her fingers lingered. His breath hitched barely but enough. He stepped closer. Their lips met like a question. Not a deal, not a demand. Just a quiet, tentative offering. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Later they lay tangled beneath the old quilt, the fire casting soft shadows across the walls. He touched her like someone afraid to ask for too much. She let him. And in the silence after, neither said what it meant. Not yet. In the dim hush of the cabin, Samson whispered, "This wasn't the plan." Clara smiled faintly. Plans change. For a moment the world outside disappeared. Just the heat between them, the steady rise and fall of breath, and something fragile stretching between two people who had nothing left to lose. Clara rose before dawn. She wrapped herself in her coat and stepped outside barefoot, feeling the damp earth under her feet. Fog curled low across the yard, clinging to the fence posts, the trees. She walked toward the edge of the forest where a small clearing opened behind the barn. There, two wooden crosses stood, one smaller than the other. She knelt beside them. The smaller grave had no name, just a bundle of dried flowers at its base. The other was old, the wood weathered and cracked. She touched the smaller one gently. "Lila," she whispered. She stayed there a long time. When she returned, Samson was already up, boiling water for coffee. "I saw them," she said. He nodded. "I buried the second one myself," he said. "The other my father. He was a hard man. Mean. I didn't cry when he went. Why leave them unmarked? They don't need names to be remembered." Clara poured herself a cup and joined him at the table. "What about your mother?" she asked. He shook his head. "Never knew her. She ran before I could remember." She took a slow sip, then looked at him over the rim of the mug. "You're not as alone as you think." He didn't respond. Just stared at her like trying to believe her was the hardest thing he'd ever done. That afternoon, they repaired the chicken coop together. Elijah joined them, weaker but steady. They laughed once when the rooster tried to peck Samson's boot and nearly fell into the feed bucket. It felt almost like a family. That night, Clara dreamed of warmth, of a porch in the summer, the smell of coffee, the weight of a baby against her chest. She woke with tears on her cheeks. But the warmth was short-lived. At dawn, she opened the door and saw it. Blood in the snow, a trail jagged and red leading from the tree line toward the cabin. Her heart lurched. She reached for the rifle above the door. When she woke, she was alone and the snow outside had started to bleed red. Clara's breath fogged the glass as she pressed her face to the window, eyes locked on the red line smeared across the snow. It started near the tree line and dragged jagged toward the edge of the barn, fresh blood, heavy and deliberate. Not the wild scatter of an animal, but the kind of trail left when someone wanted to be found. She grabbed the rifle from above the door, heart pounding. Samson burst through the front door a moment later, already lacing up his boots. He took one look at the blood, then turned to her. "Stay inside." She shook her head. "I'm coming. Elijah needs someone here. He's asleep. You might need backup." Their eyes held. Then reluctantly, Samson nodded once. They moved fast, tracking the blood around the barn, weapons drawn. The snow was soft from recent thaw, but the trail remained visible, thick, slowing like whatever had bled was getting weaker with every step. Samson's jaw was tight, eyes scanning the woods, like he expected a rifle barrel to rise at any second. And then they found him. Slumped against a fallen log, one hand clutched to his stomach, was a man mid-30s with a shaggy beard and dark red scarf soaked in blood. His coat was torn open, shirt stained, but the moment his eyes opened, something in Clara turned to ice. She knew that face. "Daniel," she whispered. He smiled faintly, teeth pink with blood. "Well, hell," he coughed. "Didn't expect to find you shacked up with a mountain ghost." Samson raised the rifle. "You know him," Clara's throat tightened. He's my brother-in-law, Daniel Reyes, the youngest of her dead husband's kin, the one who always smiled too wide, the one who said less and watched more, the one who waited like a vulture for something to die so he could pick the bones." "What are you doing here?" she asked. He coughed again, wet and guttural. "Came to bring you home." "I don't have a home. You've got debts. You left with his horse, his saddle, half a sack of flour, and without signing over the deed." His smile cracked wider. "Turns out that land's worth more than we thought." Samson stepped between them. "You bleeding out or buying time?" Daniel's eyes flicked to him. "You must be the savior, the one offering trade for womb arrangements in the woods." Samson cocked the rifle. "Keep talking. See how fast that mouth freezes shut." Clara stepped forward, fists clenched. "You tracked me here for land." "No." Daniel grunted. "I tracked you here because the sheriff will pay double to see you hang." She staggered back. "What desertion? Theft? Fraud? Maybe worse once I tell him how you've been hiding out with a stranger and raising his bastard." Samson hauled Daniel up by the collar, pressing him against the tree. "You're not walking out of these woods." Daniel coughed spit blood. "Then shoot me, hero. But when my men don't hear from me, they'll come. And trust me, they ain't as polite as I am." Clara stepped between them. "Let him go," what Samson snapped. "He's not bluffing," she said. "If you kill him, they'll come guns blazing. But if we patch him up, keep him quiet, we can buy time." Samson stared at her jaw working. "Damn it, Samson. Don't give him a reason to make us the villains." Finally, Samson lowered the rifle. "Drag him," he muttered. "We'll deal with this later." They hauled Daniel back to the cabin, blood trailing behind them like a curse. Clara tied a cloth around his wound, pressing firm. He groaned but didn't fight. Elijah woke during the commotion, standing silently at the doorway, watching every movement with wide, dark eyes. "Who is he?" he asked. "No one," Clara said too fast. Elijah didn't believe it. He turned and walked away. They kept Daniel in the storage room, bound at the hands and ankles. Samson checked on him every hour. Clara stayed close to Elijah, trying to keep the boy's mind calm, though hers was spinning. That night she sat by the fire, arms wrapped tight across her chest. "What happens if they come?" she asked. Samson didn't look away from the flames. "We fight. There could be 3 of them. maybe more. Then we die trying. Clara turned to him, voice low. This isn't just about land anymore. I know. He wants to drag me back to hang me. Samson looked at her then. They'd have to get through me first. The fire cracked. I'm not worth dying for, Samson. You're wrong about that. She closed her eyes. I ran to escape. But maybe I just ran in circles. You didn't run, he said. You survived. Silence hung between them. Samson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't care what your past is. I don't care what you did. You're here. With me. With the boy. That's all that matters now. She looked at him, really looked, and nodded. The next morning she woke before the sun. Elijah was already dressed, standing at the window. They're coming, he said softly. She crossed the room, looked out, and her breath caught. 3 riders, slow, deliberate, cutting across the open snow like wolves in formation. Clara turned, heart hammering. Samson was loading the shotgun. We hold them off as long as we can. Clara nodded, then reached for the rifle. I won't go back, she said, but I might have to kill to stay. The snow didn't scream, it hushed. That was the part Clara remembered most. Not the thunder of hooves, not the clatter of rifles being cocked, or even the sound of her heart pounding like a drum in her ears. Just the eerie stillness right before it all began, like the world was holding its breath. Samson stood in the doorway, his body a shield, his shotgun resting against his shoulder. Elijah crouched low by the hearth, clutching the wooden carving he never finished. Clara stood just behind Samson, rifle in hand, finger resting lightly along the trigger guard, not quite ready to aim, but ready enough to run out of time. 3 riders came into view. Their horses moved slow, as if they knew the ground they crossed was heavy with decision. Daniel's men, just like he said, rough-faced, dead-eyed, dressed in dust and leather. The one in the middle wore a badge. Not a real one. Just enough metal to make a threat look legal. The man raised a hand as they drew closer. Clara Reyes, he called. We're here for you. Come quiet, and we'll settle this with dignity. Clara stepped forward. I'm not going back, she said loud and clear. The lead man tilted his head. Ma'am, you're wanted for theft, desertion, and failure to appear in court. There was no court, she said. Just men like you deciding what a woman's life is worth. You're harboring a fugitive, he added, nodding toward the cabin. We know Daniel's inside. Clara's grip tightened. He's bleeding. You want to take him, you'll have to carry him out in pieces. The 3 men dismounted. Samson whispered, stay low. But Clara didn't move. The leader approached with careful steps, hand on his holster. Don't do something stupid. Clara raised the rifle. I already did something brave. I stayed. The moment cracked. The second rider reached for his gun. Samson fired first. The echo split the clearing, scattering birds into the air. The man spun, hit the ground, screaming. Clara dropped to her knee, aimed, fired. Missed. Elijah screamed behind her. The third rider rushed the porch. Clara pulled the trigger again. This time it hit. He dropped like a sack. The leader grabbed Samson, shoving him against the wall. The shotgun fell. Clara turned just as the man raised his pistol too fast. No! Elijah's voice tore through the air just as the boy threw himself into the man's legs. The gun went off. Samson staggered back. Clara screamed and raised the rifle again, but before she could fire, the man was already falling, Elijah on top of him, fists pounding. Silence. A long, terrible silence. Blood pooled around the porch. Samson groaned. Clara crawled to him, pressing her hands against his side. "Stay with me. Samson, look at me." "I ain't done yet," he muttered through gritted teeth. Inside the cabin, Daniel shouted. "What the hell happened out there?" Clara stood, blood on her hands, and walked to the storage room. "You brought this here," she said through the door. "I gave you a way out," he snapped. "You chose the cage." "No," Clara said. "I chose to stop running." She opened the door. He flinched. "You gonna kill me?" he asked. "No," she said. "But you're gonna rot here until spring, if you make it that long." She locked the door again. 3 days later, they buried the 2 men under the trees near the ridge. The one who lived crawled back to town, broken and half mad from blood loss. Daniel was too weak to ride, too bitter to beg. They kept him alive, barely. Mrs. Halloran brought herbs and whiskey, said nothing, just looked at Clara with a kind of tired pride. Samson healed slowly. Every step was a win, every breath a fight. But he stayed upright. He held Elijah's hand again. He stood in the sunlight and closed his eyes. Spring came like a whisper, and with it a child. Clara gave birth on a quiet morning, the windows open, the scent of pine in the air. Elijah waited just outside the door, carving a new figure, this time a mother holding a baby. Clara screamed and cried and laughed all in the same breath. Samson knelt beside her, silent tears falling into her palm. The baby's first cry broke something open in them both. Not pain, not survival, but life. Later, as they sat on the porch, Clara rocking slowly, the baby asleep against her chest, Samson whispered, "You gave me more than an heir." She looked at him, tired and whole. "You gave me someone worth being." Clara turned to Elijah, who sat carving under the old pine. "You gave us both a name," she said, "and a place to belong." The wind moved gently through the trees. The earth, once frozen and cruel, now cradled everything they loved. She had been cast out to die in the snow, but she'd found more than warmth. She'd found a reason to stay. This time, Clara said softly, "Nobody's leaving."